on this podcast, the basis of this podcast is a lot of, the connectivity between the mind and the body, and how, like I said in the beginning, there's a conversation that's always being held back and forth. So, what is your viewpoint on just kind of the basics of like where nutrition influences how your body feels and operates?
Hi, and welcome back to the MindBody Method Podcast, and I'm your host, Josh Grimm. Your nutrition isn't failing you, but your relationship with it might be. Nutrition isn't just about food, right? It's about awareness. It's about respect for your body, your energy, and your future self. For a very long time, I thought that nutrition was something that you could, dial in from and then move on from because you would, have learned behaviors from it. I thought that if you get it once, then you will always be able to. And I even think that I've held some judgment in the past of some others that would kind of yo-yo too much or, not put in the work to understand the fuel that your body actually needs. But the truth is, it's a relationship, just like anything else. And like any relationship, it evolves as you evolve. This episode isn't about perfection. It's about intention, about understanding how and what you put into your body, how it affects how you show up in your workouts, your work, your mood, your clarity, and your interpersonal relationships. I've seen nutrition transform people, not just physically, but also mentally. Confidence improves, focus sharpens, energy stabilizes, and suddenly life feels a little bit more manageable, all because of the choices that we make. In this conversation, we cut through the noise. No extremes, no guilt, just real talk about fueling yourself in a way that supports your goals and your longevity. If you're feeling tired, feeling disconnected from your body, or confused by all the information out there, this episode is here to ground you back into what actually matters. Let's dive in.
Now, someone that believes that the mind and body are in constant conversation with each other, my podcast has a lot of topics on it based on holistic health, longevity, wellness, nutrition, mindset, fitness, and kind of all of the above. So today what we're going to be talking about is something that's sort of the cornerstone for all of these topics and kind of really does enhance a lot of the outcomes, and that is nutrition. So I'm really excited for today's podcast, as the guest that I have today is someone I consider a friend and someone that I've known for a little over 2 years now, and his name is Sam Forget. So I met Sam in New York City 2 years plus ago, while he was living there, and I'll have him tell you a little bit more about his journey. But Sam now resides in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I had the pleasure of spending time with him last holiday season, just about a year ago in Buenos Aires, and he showed me a little bit about his town, and we had some great dinner and got to converse and whatnot. So, um, let me introduce you to my guest, nutrition and lifestyle expert guru, Sam Forget. So, Sam, thanks for being here.
Josh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So, I just gave a brief description of who you are. So, why don't you tell the audience here, the listeners, more about you? Kind of tell us your journey, who you are, and why you're in Buenos Aires, why you even moved around from city to city, and things like that.
Sure. So, my professional background, similar to you, is in personal training. That's where I got my start, where I grew up in Massachusetts. But I actually had a traveling personal training business. So, I had a bunch of equipment that I was loading up into my car, and I was driving to my clients' houses to coach them. And the sessions were going super well. It was really fun. But what I found was that for most of my clients, what their goals were in terms of losing weight and getting healthier and feeling better, a lot of what was holding them back was the stuff that was happening between the sessions. So, how they were eating, how they were managing their stress, how they were sleeping. So, what I started doing at that time was basically spending a little bit of each session helping them with those things. So, basically, how did you eat between this session and the last time that I was here? And that started becoming an increasingly big emphasis to the point where I said I should kind of formalize some sort of program around this to give people support outside of the gym, outside of their workouts, I should say. Because even if you're nailing those 3, 4, maybe 5 hours per week, you have 95% of the rest of the week that you got to keep it a decent enough place if you want to see progress, if you want to kind of maximize things. So then I moved from the traveling service to a hybrid service for a couple of years where I was doing both in-person training, also supporting people online. And then by 2018, I went fully online completely doubled down on the nutrition, lifestyle, basically everything that's happening between the workout side of things. And that, to answer your question about traveling and moving around, that's when I left my hometown in Massachusetts and first moved to Miami. I knew
Right.
absolutely nobody. I just wanted to do the classic, put all my stuff in my car, fresh start somewhere else. Let's see how this goes. Which actually, there have been a lot of nutritional and lifestyle lessons in there because what started in Miami moved on to New York because I lived there years before you and I ever connected. That moved into Spain, England. Again, I'm in Argentina now, a lot of other stints in different places. So that has actually helped me a lot on the coaching side of things because the very nature of moving and traveling so much, it's very rare that I can really be perfect with a plan. So I've had to learn how to live in the middle, just do the best I can based on what each week's circumstances are. Fast forward to 2025, 13 years into coaching. Here's where I'm at.
So I know you're in Buenos Aires, and you've been there. What has it been? 2 years, or how long has it been?
Like a year and a half
Year and a
since
half.
I first got here. I'm completely forgetting. There was also Australia in the middle of this
Ah, yeah,
earlier
yeah,
this
yeah. I
year.
remember.
Yeah,
So, do you find it difficult to like? I mean, obviously, now your entire business is online, digital, correct?
correct. Yes.
So, is there like as you move into some of these new places, do you have clients that are predominantly more from the location where you are, or are you carrying now a pretty global roster?
Yeah, clients are from all over the world, and no matter where I live, no matter the time zone, the city, my routine is exactly the same. So the cadence in which I'm able to check in with my clients and support them, it might look slightly different in terms of when my emails hit their inbox, but we get in a regular cadence no matter where I am. So in terms of the workflow, in terms of the coaching, client support, it's the same no matter where I am.
Do you ever miss any kind of one-on-ones in person?
Big time, big
Oh,
time.
really? Okay.
Yeah, I think about that often. I mean, I think online is wonderful because of the way that you can support people every day, just throughout the entire day, throughout the entire week, compared to how I felt limited when I was maybe only seeing somebody for a single session. But I think a sweet spot is actually a little bit of both because that in-person connection, seeing somebody lift a weight they never thought they'd be able to lift. They've just never walked into a gym and felt like I can lift that weight. Seeing them surprise themselves, the ability to, look somebody in the eye, shake their hand, be right there. I think that's
Mhm.
something super special and beneficial as well. At this phase of life, online is still the right spot for me, but I would absolutely entertain kind of that hybrid model at some point in the future.
No, I mean, from what I know about you, you're a very structured person, which I find very admirable. So with all of your clients being so global, do you limit the amount of time that your clients can take from you outside of the weekly check-ins or bi-weekly check-ins or however you do? I mean, do you have kind of an open forum for them to say, I need to talk to you, I need to talk to you now, or is it like you wait for a specific check-in time to answer any kind of questions?
Yeah, so the way my check-ins work is Monday is the big like main check-in day. That's where I look at all client data from the previous week. So I have them tracking their nutrition, their step counts, their sleep, their hunger levels. We're looking at biofeedback, so basically how their body's responding to whatever protocol they're on. I'll give them feedback on their previous week, and that's where we start planning for the week ahead. Because of course everybody knows what they're supposed to do in theory, but what happens if say at the time we're recording this around Christmas, what if you're traveling and seeing family for a few days? What if you have a date and you don't want to be weird and talk about calories? How do you navigate the real life stuff? So on Mondays, that's where we reflect and then we plan. And then I have an open inbox all week. My only fully unplugged day is Sunday. So if somebody has a change of plans midweek, they drop me an email, and then every day I do a sweep of every single client check-in thread to make sure they're good to go.
That's smart. So like, okay, so I know that you are, a nutrition and a lifestyle coach. What, how would you categorize I think nutrition is kind of self-explanatory for many. I know there's a lot of parameters that go around that because um, there's a lot of involvement around the actual area of nutrition, which we're going to get into. But tell me what you say for like a lifestyle coach. How would you describe that part of your business?
I would say if I had to kind of categorize it as four main pillars, we have the movement side of things, we have nutrition, and then I would say your sleep hygiene, which is a mix of your sleep habits and your actual sleep environment and your ability to manage stress. Because as you know, and obviously you educate people on very often, so much of people's consistency with movement and with nutrition isn't actually directly related to movement and nutrition issues. It might be, okay, I'm supposed to stick to whatever this food plan is, but I feel so stressed and I just want to treat myself and I
Mhm.
just want to say whatever with my nutrition, I'll get back on track tomorrow. Or maybe I slept really poorly last night and I just cannot be bothered to prep something. I'm going to order takeout or something like that. So this
Right.
kind of last two big rocks would be, let's get your sleep not optimized. I always tell people I don't expect you to go to bed at 9 o'clock and have no social life, but let's at least move you along the spectrum of perhaps really poor sleep to decent enough for what you're after. And same thing for stress management. And I would just say ability to cope with just the ebbs and flows of daily life, work demands, relationship stuff, anything that could really drain you that might make you start negotiating your plan. And I mean, perhaps this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but something that I have all my clients do is come up with a coping toolbox that does not revolve around food or alcohol. Now, food and alcohol can bring joy, it's a part of culture and connection, and that's fine. We just can't have it be the only tools in the toolbox when we feel like we need some sort of relief or recreation. And most
Right.
people, if you ask them, hey, if you couldn't eat out or drink for the next few weeks, how would you unwind? How would you have fun? It's crickets for most people. So that's where we proactively say, hey, let's give this a little thought so you don't just default to what you're used to. And again, I'm not saying they're bad, but we just want to have other ways that you can cope with the stressors of life that aren't just, being a little too nutritionally flexible.
Right. I think that probably a lot of your clients, I mean, I experienced this as well. Like, if people come to me to be their personal trainer, their personal coach, I deliver more than just a program, or I deliver more than just seeing them for the hour of the gym, which obviously you do the same, where, you incorporate other little things that go along with it, like, sleep stressors and stress management, mindset coaching, whatnot. I think that that's when you kind of have the client that is like really resonates with things like that because they're going to be able to see some lifestyle changes and actually work towards their goals, right? But let's talk a little bit about, most people think that they actually do understand what nutrition is. But if you were to have someone that comes to you and wants you to explain like just the fundamentals of a good nutrition program, what would you say?
So I think a really important distinction here is when we talk about good nutrition, there can be good nutrition for different goals. For example, performance, body composition, overall health. We could even add just the fun and flexibility side of things. So certainly there are some general principles that I'll touch upon in a second that would apply to any of these directions, but that's the first follow up I have if a client says, is this good? Should I be eating this? Well, it depends. If you're some college guys trying to gain a bunch of weight as quickly as possible, maybe you do have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and whole milk. Whereas if you're a middle-aged woman with a desk job who's really struggling to lose weight, that might not necessarily be good nutrition for you. So I'd always want to define, okay, what are we after here? Because the best possible decisions are going to look at least a little different person to person. But in terms of general principles, a diet that is mostly comprised of single ingredient foods.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
saying things that are, and then portions and macronutrient ratios are adjusted based on your personal goals. I'm not saying things that are more heavily processed, like it's such a buzzword and a thing that people fear. Like, is a food processed? Is that bad? The water we drink on a daily basis is processed in some way. So that's not inherently a bad thing. But as a whole, if we look at a spectrum from single ingredient and minimally processed to ultra processed foods, I would say, of course, on the whole, we're looking at things that are minimally processed. And then the levers we pull person to person, like I said, would be portions, so calories, the composition of those calories between your proteins, carbs, and fats. I actually think meal timing is an underrated thing for people to be focusing on, not because it technically matters for body composition, but because it can impact things like energy levels, cognition, your ability to manage hunger, not needing to rely on willpower as much. So I would say those are some general things for most people.
What do you find is the one that most people have a problem kind of like adjusting their lifestyle to out of what you just kind of listed?
Yeah, out of all those focal points, I would say getting enough protein. And I know it's such a fitness meathead thing to say, you got to eat more protein, you got to eat more protein. But we're looking at everything from better hunger management. If you have body composition goals, it's going to help you either maintain muscle while you are losing weight or develop muscle if you're at maintenance and a surplus. We're even looking at at least a slightly increased metabolic rate by getting more. And it's one of those things where people look for every possible workaround of I'm going to have, whether it's just not focusing on it at all, or I'm going to have protein pasta, protein bread, everything but
Right.
eating a chicken breast or some eggs and again,
Right.
those things have their place, but sometimes the answer is the very unsexy thing staring us in the face, which is no, just more whole food sources of protein. Now, the tricky part is that compared to carbs and fats, on average, most protein sources, high quality sources, require at least a little bit of prep compared
Yes.
to carbs and fats, which they're a breeze to just get without any effort. So it's going to require at least some planning and effort. But the benefit you see from increasing your intake, and I'm not saying you have to be, old school bodybuilding magazines, 2 pounds per gram of weight and just, eat chicken breasts all day, but even getting to a moderate amount is, enormously beneficial.
I always find that, I when I talk about, single ingredient foods to my clients, there are a lot that really get it, understand it, but there's always such a want to just look at just the macros, and they feel like, they want, if they know what their macros are, then they're good, right? But like they don't understand kind of all the things that you're saying here, which has so much value about the importance of the single ingredient foods, which is, like you said, it's just, I know for me, whenever I decide to go on a diet that's pretty clean, like I call it.
Mhm.
It's like you just feel better, your energy levels are better, you sleep better. I mean, I always sleep perfectly anyway, but you sleep good and you just feel lighter and you feel like, you're just ready for more of what life comes to throw at you physically, for sure. So on this podcast, the basis of this podcast is a lot of, the connectivity between the mind and the body, and how, like I said in the beginning, there's a conversation that's always being held back and forth. So, what is your viewpoint on just kind of the basics of like where nutrition influences how your body feels and operates?
So I think it's very, very common for people to almost pit most nutritional protocols, which tend to be very numerically focused, with anything that is mindfulness driven. So when people hear about mindful eating and focusing more on like how the mind impacts things and it's your relationship with food, it's almost like one is numerical, one is non-numerical, so they can't possibly coexist. When in reality, they very much do, and they play very nicely together. So far, I have talked a lot about, numerically focused things, say like managing your calories or getting your protein up. But also something that'll impact how you feel very much on a daily basis would be mindful eating strategies. And again, I know that can sound ambiguous to a lot of people, but if I had to kind of summarize how I would describe that, it would be paying attention to things like texture, flavor, your enjoyment of the things that you're eating, how it's making you feel afterward, your satisfaction, whether you've reached a point of diminishing return. So basically paying attention to all the non-numerical stuff. Now, the reason so many people struggle with that is because we live in a world that is just so go, go, go. Especially in New York, right? Everybody is eating while they're walking. It's like, let's do a walk and talk meeting where I wolf something down and just keep things moving. And that can make it very tough to pay attention to all of those things I just mentioned. So, similar to sleep, how I said, I never expect anybody to get a perfect night's sleep. But if we go from 2 nights of good sleep per week to 4, wonderful. Same thing with improving your mindful eating meal to meal. If you're somebody that generally has 18 out of 21 meals per week standing up, not paying attention to anything
Mm,
besides just finishing the meal and moving on to your next thing, and you can go to
right.
even half of your meals sitting down without a screen in front of you, putting your utensil down between bites, things that are very simple like that, so it's easier to pay attention. Your digestion will be better. You'll notice which foods make you feel which ways physically from a
Mhm.
cognitive perspective, and it'll get easier to make adjustments because once you start feeling better, you're not going to want to lose that feeling. So, yes, we have the numerical protocols and those have their value. But one of the reasons why I love the work you do, Josh, is you also focus on this harder to quantify, but just as valuable side of the equation, which is the mindfulness stuff.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Whenever
of course.
you take on a new client for, nutrition coaching, or, you know, how often is it that you are actually writing an actual meal plan, or are you just giving them the parameters, advice, trying to get them to understand everything that we've talked about so far? Is that more important for a successful journey in your nutrition coaching with them? Or do you have clients that are asking for, I want you to tell me what I'm eating, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, 6 or 7 days a week?
I would say most people ask for that. There's a big just tell
They
me
don't
what to
follow it
eat
though.
factor. Yeah, there's that element for sure. Definitely that. So it is super common where people say, I make a million decisions on a daily basis between work, family, whatever. Just tell me what to eat. And like I'm really good at following rules, which, as you said, a lot of people ultimately are not that great, even if you do write the meal plan. But what I find is that, kind of like we talked about earlier, it doesn't account for real life. So I could sit here and say, okay, ideally I want you to eat this, this, and this. But what happens when your stress is extremely high and you want no part of whatever that original meal plan was? What happens if you're traveling, you don't have access to those foods? So, what I prefer to do with my clients, similar to the stress management toolbox, is actually come up with a weekly menu with basically a rotation of options. So, I have a nutrition guide, of course, that I send every client that has basically a big menu that you can pull from. Here, 10 to 15 breakfast, lunches, and dinners that are very simple. I mean, if you're looking for a fancy Instagram worthy meal, I guess people don't really post food photos as much now, but if you're looking for something,
Oh, no.
super visual, I'm probably not your guy, but simple, practical, makes you feel good. What we do is say, all right, which you're telling me that you want me to tell you what to eat, but let's look at this together. Which two or three of these breakfasts feel realistic for your life, your schedule, your food preferences? Because, of course, there has to be an enjoyment factor as well. And then what happens is if we have a relatively small weekly menu, it strikes a nice balance between flexible enough to be sustainable. Because maybe you're on the road, but at the average hotel breakfast, you could still have, say, fruit, oatmeal, yogurt, eggs, things that might be on your regular menu at home.
Mhm.
But it's also simple enough where you're not having to, reinvent the wheel and think about what you're going to have at every single meal. So I'm a huge fan of proactively coming up with a weekly menu that's a little bit more broad than a rigid meal plan.
Have you run into any experience, since you do have a global roster and you've lived in many different places like New York, Buenos Aires, Australia, London, or I don't know if it was London, but in England.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, as far as like what are the options for people? I mean, it's going to change depending on where you are. If you're in the country, if you're in the city, wherever. Like, do you ever have anybody kind of asking you to help them go over that hurdle and that obstacle and make that an opportunity to rectify?
Definitely, yeah. It changes a fair amount, country to country, based on, cultural norms for what people are eating. So again, here I am talking, general, eat a chicken breast, maybe have this, that, the other. But a common example or an example that comes up a lot. I grew up in Massachusetts. There are an enormous amount of Brazilians in Massachusetts. So a lot of my
Hmm.
friends are either from Brazil, maybe their parents are from Brazil, and super common in a Brazilian diet is to have rice and beans with virtually every meal. And I've worked with Brazilians before who fear, because of all the fear mongering around carbs, that, well, if I work with Sam, is he going to tell me that I can't have white rice anymore? And
Right.
there's never a world where I'm going to say that. So that's where, I had talked about different nutrition for different goals. We have to factor in performance, body composition, health, but also culture and enjoyment as well. So yes, it'll definitely vary at least somewhat country to country, depending on cultural norms for what are typical things to eat, depending on the food somebody has access to. Certainly that changes, when people travel. I have a lot of clients who come to me because they know I've traveled a lot over the years. So they know that I'll get it in terms of, well, breakfast is at this hotel, and then I'm eating out here and I have no idea what the local cuisine is. And then I'm going here for dinner. So we always just look at, again, we establish what is the goal for the day, the week, the month, and then what is the best we can do given the options available to us. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to optimize. We just kind of stay on the highest rung possible of what's within our control.
And I also even think, like, even for instance, like whenever I was in Buenos Aires last year and you and I had that delicious steak at the restaurant, having a steak like that, which was just seasoned perfectly and it was so was cooked so well, and it just felt like such good quality. And then sometimes you go to a local place here in New York. I mean, New York's one of the best places in the world for food. I get it, but it just tastes different. It just tastes different in Buenos Aires for some reason.
Yeah.
So, what are some of like maybe some of the bigger mistakes that people make when they're trying to like kind of eat healthy or get on track with their plan?
I would say, thanks to most social media content nowadays, trying to over optimize. So it's very common where I'm talking to somebody who does not yet have a consistent eating schedule. They just kind of eat at random times throughout the day. They've never really tracked their food on any sort of consistent basis. Protein's pretty low. They're not really getting fruits and vegetables, but they're worried about, a glycemic index or, the supposed benefits of intermittent fasting and all this very, fine tuning minutia, or just not even, overly valuable things that are way on the other end of the spectrum of, hey, let's start you with, first of all, do you even drink any water? And that may sound like a silly suggestion or question, but a lot of people basically just go straight from coffee to maybe alcohol at the end of the day and don't have a whole lot of water. So I would say it would be coming out of the gate too hot with,
Hmm.
let me, reach for all these optimization strategies. But when you're designing a plan, and I believe this to be the case for whether it's nutrition, a better sleep plan, stress management, even the workout side of things, I always want us to design it with the most time constrained, least motivated, just busiest version of you. Because if we can design the plan for that person, you'll be able to stick with it on a weekly basis. And even if that plan doesn't look like much, you will get way more out of putting together a bunch of good enough days in a row by not agonizing over optimizing compared to just only occasionally being able to fire on all cylinders.
I think that's really good advice. I never really kind of looked at it that way. Whenever you're thinking about, giving the advice as far as designing a plan, the most time constrained. I mean, that's amazing. That's actually one of my next questions was how do you help your clients stay on track when they're traveling?
Yeah, so I just use the phrase, or I guess the analogy, staying on the highest rung possible. And the way that I like to have my clients visualize this is with something that I call the ladder method. And if we picture different rungs on a ladder, the very top rung might be something like, of course, it depends on the client and their goals, but say a client with fat loss goals, top rung might be planning every single meal in advance, tracking them very precisely, eating mostly single ingredient foods, mostly homemade meals, very little or no alcohol. That's the top rung on the ladder. You're not going to be able to hang out there all the time. So if you are in a travel situation, this is where a lot of people just say, well, I can't stay on the top rung. I'm just going to jump off the ladder. That's where I say, no,
Right.
just stay on the highest rung you can. You can't plan all three meals in advance. That's fine. Can we at least get a draft in for breakfast and lunch that'll set the tone for a much better day? Maybe you're not at the, you're at the mercy of other people for all three meals and you have no idea. That's fine. Or maybe the options that you're served have virtually no protein, no fiber sources in there. Actually, fiber is a separate rabbit hole that we can go down, but we just look at, okay, based on the options available to you today, what is the highest rung that you can stay on? The only thing I want from clients is that they never get off the ladder altogether. I don't care if you are hanging on by a thread to that bottom rung, you were served nothing but pizza and beer. Guess what? There's still stuff within your control. Like, okay, I'm going to have 2 slices instead of 4. I'm going to have one
Right.
beer instead of 6. And that may not feel worthwhile, but like I said, it's a string of good enough days that'll bring you success, not only occasionally getting to the top of that ladder and then jumping off every time you can't stay up there.
Yeah, that's another good visual actually. Do you have clients or do you kind of really push gut health a lot? Do people understand it? Do people have a misconception of what that means? I generally feel that there's not a huge understanding of what gut health actually is. So do you talk a lot about that?
Yeah, I mean, so the big thing you had asked about before is, how your nutrition impacts how you feel on a daily basis. And I think most people's thought and emphasis with nutrition is purely how it makes them look. It's almost thinking of nutrition as a
Mhm.
vehicle to have more visible abs and more veins in your biceps. And yes, it can be used as a tool for that. But when we look at something like gut health, that's going to impact everything from, again, your cognition, just how sharp you feel on a daily
Right.
basis, your ability to work really well, stay focused. It's going to impact things like your energy levels to, sustain whatever work that you're doing, obviously to perform really well in the gym, to recover, never mind just general discomfort if your gut health is not in a good place. And if we look at strategies for improving your gut health, so your cognition, your energy, your performance, even things like your moods are in a better place, that's where we go back to the single ingredient side of things. So it's actually pretty typical for people to be nailing the numerical side of the equation, but because they're doing it with more, again, process isn't inherently bad, but because people are kind of playing macronutrient Tetris with protein bars, pre-made protein shakes, Kodiak cakes, high protein pasta, you're checking the numerical box, but you feel just a little bit off. You're
Right.
not feeling super sharp. So that's where we have to look at not only, the numbers you're hitting, but how you're getting there so your gut health is better. Not to mention, most of your immune system is actually located in your gut. So if we're looking at immune support as well, I mean, again, it's a very underrated focal point because most people do just hone in on, well, how is nutrition going to make me look, and not giving enough emphasis on the feel side of things as well.
I definitely noticed even for myself, if I'm having one of those crazy 14, 15, 16-hour days where I can't find the time to get a proper meal in, and of course I will resort to a shake here and there, but it becomes really bad when I'm actually resorting to like a protein bar. And that like third tier of a protein, you feel terrible afterwards. It does nothing for you except it satisfies some sort of like appetite craving for the immediate, but you feel the difference later on in the day just from having that type of nutrient going inside your body.
Oh, for
Um,
sure.
do you have do you have a lot of clients that come to you with maybe these social media fads or crazes or things like that that they've learned so much from all these professionals on social media, so whatever you tell them about keto or whatever you tell them about fasting or detoxing, they're going to resort back to say, well, these influencers have told me XYZ and they have these photos to prove. So what are your opinions about these kind of crazy fads, and do you think there's value in some of them?
Oh, that's such a good question because, in general, as we've both seen so many times over the years, people tend to equate the size of somebody's following, the size of their audience, with expertise in their field. And there are certainly exceptions to what I'm about to say, but very often the size of somebody's audience is at least somewhat proportional to how polarizing and black and white they're willing to be. So if you look at content that is basically the things we're talking about, hey, eat, mostly whole foods and try to get more protein and fiber. The occasional drink is, not the end of the world, and that's okay. That's not overly interesting social media content.
Right. Right.
Whereas if I follow a named diet, pretty much any diet with a name, for the most part, I'm not a huge fan of. If I have a named diet and I am this guy on social media and I push that as the cure all for absolutely everything, it tends to do far better on social media because you either have people who buy into it, who just become super fans, whatever that is, or people who resist it. But again, it just does better on social media. Oftentimes that results in more eyeballs, more audience growth. And like I just said, there are exceptions to this. There are wonderful coaches like yourself that have large audiences. So it's not a universal thing, but you're not Josh, never eat carbs no matter what, Grimm on social
Right.
media. And which, that's how a lot of people build their following. So if I had to give people, general advice for what to look out for, you know, certainly named diets or any account that takes such harsh takes on things that it would hurt their perceived credibility, audience size, or their revenue to be more nuanced. So, for example, if you're super hardcore about keto and that's how you built your business, and I'm not saying keto is never a good option for, nobody, but if that's how you built your business is keto, 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 if you come to somebody or if a person comes to you and it makes sense for them to have carbs, your hands are a little tied to say like, yeah, actually, it makes more sense for your goals to increase carbs. They could see you as disingenuous.
Right.
They might
Right.
not want to work with you. You could lose revenue. So, again, I would keep an eye out for those things. If somebody has leaned super hard into any sort of named diet or protocol where it could potentially hurt their revenue or just, audience traction to be a bit more nuanced.
So I personally don't know a lot about fasting, although I've been dabbling in and out of it, and I have to admit, the things that I learn are from podcasts and people with large followings. But I kind of try it out here and there. For a while, I was fasting on Sundays completely, except for water, whatnot. But and I definitely felt fantastic the next day. Do you have a strong opinion about fasting or the different kind of like time frames you should or shouldn't do it?
Sure. So, from a pure physiological perspective,
Yes.
most of the benefits associated with fasting just come from the calorie management. For a lot of people, eating within a specific window, I would say the most common being the 16-8, where on average, people are going to go 12 at noon to 8 p.m. You keep all of your eating within that window. It's not the fasting necessarily that is magical or making all these changes. It's the way that the reduced feeding window is allowing you to manage your overall calories and then very likely your body fat percentage as well. And
Right.
obviously, as a whole, if your body fat percentage is coming down, you're generally going to feel a bit better. That said, if I were to make a case for it for some people, I think from a lifestyle perspective, the simplification of let me just get up and hit the ground running with my day, and just really a simplified day of let me focus on lunch, maybe mid-afternoon snack, and then dinner. That can be a fine option. I also think cognitively speaking, for some people, they feel really sharp when they're doing it. So if it's a personal preference thing where somebody likes how it simplifies their day, they feel sharp, they feel fine while they're doing it, wonderful. I just wouldn't want anybody to be doing it because they feel like they have to, like it's additionally beneficial compared to
Mhm.
just managing your overall calories. Because if you were to just Google, what are the benefits of fasting? Much of what you see is actually a calorie management thing and not something
Mhm.
that's necessarily fasting specific. And one last consideration I'd throw in here, I've talked a lot about getting enough protein and fiber. And a
Right.
lot of people really struggle to get enough over the course of an entire day. So if you reduce their feeding window and now they're having just two meals, and I want you at 150 grams of protein and say 30 grams of fiber, 75 grams of protein and 15 grams of fiber in each meal. One, it's going to be numerically a tough box to check, but then also you might feel super bloated. You might not feel super great condensing your food like that. So, as a
Right.
personal preference for some people, fine, but it's certainly not magical.
So on the other end of the spectrum, what is your opinion on cheat days? Because that's something I get a lot. Or cheat meals, cheat days. I mean, you hear that all the time, I'm sure. Like,
Yeah.
it's I hear that in the training world so many times that, on their one day a week and they are gorging on hamburgers and fries and pizza and Diet Coke, like whatever it is, whatever they want to put in front of them. So I mean, that's a complete opposite of what we just talked about. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, so as you know, the idea of cheat days, the origins come from bodybuilding. People who
Right.
are generally
It's a
extremely,
reward.
yeah, exactly, just extremely strict and dialed in with their nutrition the vast majority of the time. And as you know, a lot of bodybuilding coaches will make like a metabolic case for working in cheat days. Perhaps there's a little bro science in there, but it is a bodybuilding specific origin. I would say for the 99% of us that do not plan on stepping on stage, I do not love the idea of cheat meals or cheat days because most people struggle enough with an all or nothing mindset mentality when it comes to their nutrition. So if we are looking forward to some sort of cheat day, cheat meal at the end of the week, it can lead to extremes on either end of the spectrum. Maybe all week you are over restricting, creeping too far into unsustainable waters, doing things that don't make you feel great in anticipation of this big overdo it kind of day where yeah maybe you get some immediate enjoyment from that level of flexibility, but when we look at gut health, when we look at sleep quality, we look at everything after, it tends to yo-yo people too much between quote unquote on track to quote unquote off track, back and forth, back and forth. So I would much rather have people just be proactively moderate to take whatever foods they feel like they can only have on a cheat day. I want to take those off the pedestal because if we create all this buildup like that, they are very difficult to consume in moderation. So I'd say for non-bodybuilders, almost always a non-go, no-go.
So what would be something that would surprise, your listeners, these viewers about your own nutrition? Anything?
I
Is there anything?
Actually, yeah. I mean, and I'm sure you get this too when you go out and you're around other people and you have something that is not, you know, chicken and broccoli. If somebody sees you eating a piece of pizza or maybe having a glass of wine, it's a lot of the you eat that because people
Right.
think, well, you know, if I care about my health and fitness, if this person supposedly does, you can't have that stuff. So I would say it's exactly what I just touched upon with this cheat day stuff, where I want my clients to be proactively, you know, reasonably moderate and flexible. And I do the same thing. So, you know, you mentioned the food down here in Argentina. One of the more popular things is what's called a media luna, which is basically a glazed croissant. People down here don't like when you compare it to a croissant, but that's essentially what it is. That's the best comp. And there are times where I'll go out and I have, you know, kind of like a coffee with a bunch of sugar and milk in it, and then I have a media luna. And people might look at that and say, like, the nutrition guy is having, there's no protein
That's
on
right.
that plate. You have no fruit here. But that doesn't make up the vast majority of things that I'm eating on a weekly basis. But there's absolutely a place for that. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying about not looking to over optimize. We're just looking to bring up your average day and your average week. So I do think that surprises people when they see me eating things that theoretically fit healthy people aren't supposed to eat. But I would say that most people actually should be to some degree if you want to be able to sustain this.
Do you think that the conversation about nutrition and mindset is changing, evolving, or, and do you think that's going to continue? I mean, I believe it's changing over the past few years, and I don't feel like we talk so much about these fad diets anymore. Like, we mentioned the keto and things like that, but they don't seem as in your face as they used to, even 5, 10 years ago. Do you think that's the direction that we're going as a society when it comes to nutrition?
I think one of the biggest shifts will be the percentage of people on a GLP-1.
Okay.
I would not be surprised if that continues to trend upward and upward, where it's more common than not that somebody is at least taking a small dose of a GLP-1. So I think a lot of the support that we do as coaches and trainers is going to be on the if we look at what people tend to run into who are on a GLP-1, things like malnutrition because they're just looking to reduce calories as much as possible, or thinking less food is always a better thing, muscle loss, the sustainability factor, lifestyle, we keep going back to that. I think a lot of the focal point is going to be on supporting the increasingly large percentage of people that will likely be on a GLP-1. I just don't see a scenario where that's going in the other direction. And I'm not saying anything bad about that. That's just, I feel like it's likely going that way. So the way we support people, what we focus on might be a bit more muscle retention, health, and sustainability focused.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on all of that you said. That's definitely a different podcast because you could talk about that for a
Yes.
very, very long time. I want to talk, do a quick like rapid fire. I'm just gonna ask you a couple of quick questions. One food that you think everyone should eat more of.
Chicken.
One food, I knew you were gonna say that. One
Yep.
food that you think people should reduce.
Not technically food. I'm going to say alcohol. I don't know if that's cheating, but I'm going to say alcohol.
Okay. Your go-to breakfast.
I have hard boiled eggs and a protein shake that I make every night so I can spend zero time preparing nutrition in the morning.
What about a most underrated food habit?
Consistent meal timing.
Okay, and a most overrated trend.
For some reason, people wearing blood glucose monitors just came to mind, and that's wildly
Okay.
unnecessary for 99% of people.
We didn't talk at all about supplements. We didn't get to that, but do you have a a favorite supplement that you think people should take for in their nutrition?
Yeah, so I mean, protein powder, I know sometimes meatheads don't necessarily count that as a supplement, but for the average person, it is. It's just such a convenient, easy way to get 30, 40 grams of protein. I have a lot of clients who will actually bring a little bit of protein powder in a bag, say when they're traveling. They can throw it into the oatmeal that's at a hotel at the breakfast buffet in the morning. You can throw it in water as a snack. So, yeah, protein. And if I can cheat and add a second one, I like creatine a lot for performance. And
Mm.
also, as I'm sure you've seen, a lot of recent research has shown the benefits on cognition as well. So I'd say
Right.
I'm going to cheat, but protein and creatine.
So listen, Sam, I wanted to say thank you so much. You gave it a lot of valuable information. I'm excited for my viewers and listeners to hear what you had to say. For all of you who want to learn more about Sam, this is Sam Forget, and it's spelled SAMFORGET. And you can go to his website at sam4j.com to learn more. He has a podcast out too. It's called Transformation Talks. He's on his second season right now. And his Instagram handle is at Coach Sam. So again, Sam4J is SAMFORGET. So thank you everyone for listening to the Mind Body Method Podcast. And anywhere that you listen to your podcast, please like, subscribe, give us feedback. My Instagram handle is JoshGrimm _Fitnut, FITNUT. And welcome your feedback. We are here every Wednesday, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on Mind Body Method. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by me, Josh Grimm, produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig. Original music composed by Nell Balabin. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others to discover the show. I'd love to stay connected with you, so join the conversation by following me at JoshGrimm _Fitnut on Instagram and by emailing me at questions@mindbodypodcast.com.